In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to Him. And may peace and blessings be upon His Prophet, the seal of all messengers, the guidance to mankind. And may peace and blessings be upon His pure and immaculate family. Please recite aloud salawat. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. The topic of my lecture today is yaghza, awakening, or to be awake. Now the title of this retreat is to be awake. Literally, the title of this retreat is to be awake. Yesterday, we talked about this concept of muhasaba, that accounting is really important to do, that it's so fundamental to our spirituality to sit there and account for our deeds and take this accounting and make sure we do it every night and continue to do that, and it'll change our character. Now, this concept of yaghza, it's a very difficult thing to describe because urafa or Islamic mystics talk about it. I'm not going to talk about that and go deep into that. I'm just going to talk about it from the perspective of a hadith of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam. Here's what I would like to speak about in contrast to yaghza, which is important. In order to know what this concept is, because if I tell you Islam has this concept, it's called to be awake, what does that even mean? What does it mean to be awake? Now, the way that the traditions of Ahlul Bayt explain this is understanding the opposite of this. And that's to be asleep. Now, if we look at what sleep is a funny thing. Yesterday we talked about doing Salatul Layl, and we talked about waking up and getting out of bed. Salatul Fajr is one of the most difficult things for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who love sleep. How many people here love sleep? I know there's a lot of people who love sleep. I know. Okay. Sleep is good. I mean, I remember one time somebody told me, I was telling them about waking up for Salatul Fajr, and the person said to me, I saw the look on his face. He said to me, Brother Kauther, but I just love sleep. I said, I know, brother, but you got to get up. He said, I have like 4 alarms. It still doesn't work. Now, sleep has certain qualities. We go through, sleep doctors or sleep psychologists document what happens when we sleep. We go through these certain cycles in the daytime in 24 hours called these circadian rhythms. Okay, and in sleep we go through certain cycles. We go through cycle 1, which is before REM. It's kind of a light dozing off. You know, if you get a little bit tired, for instance, when you're fasting, just take that afternoon nap. You may go in your car, you may go somewhere at home, and you just take that nice afternoon nap. You go into this slight little dozing off. But then you go into a deeper sleep after that, if you stay there. And this is NREM 2. You go into this little bit deeper sleep. Then you go to NREM 3, and that's an even deeper sleep. And then you go into REM. And that's where the good sleep is. Okay? and you go really deep into REM. And that's where all these dreams start. Now, the funny thing about sleep is we think that the cycle is like this. We go into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, and then we wake up. But that's not how our bodies work. What happens is we go into the first stage, and then the second stage, the third stage, and then we go into REM, and then we come back. And then we go back, and we come back, and we go back, and we come back. And that's sleep. This is why many times we wake up at Fajr, and we're in a certain dream state, and we're like, oh, that was such a great dream, I just woke up. These rhythms happen, so we dream at different points in the night. Now, why is sleep so important? Why is the study of sleep so important? This metaphor has been given in hadith. A very, very powerful hadith has been given, narrated by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this hadith is that when you are living, you are asleep, and when you die, you wake up. When you are living, you are asleep. When you die, yaghza happens. We awaken to some profound reality. Now, we know it's sleep, just like when we wake up for Fajr, at least me or many of us, the alarm clock goes off, or maybe we naturally wake up, and it's a little bit excruciating. You have to get up, and if it's cold, you have to go do wudu, and then you have to go and you have to pray, and you have to get back in bed, and then if you go to work in the morning, you have to get up again, and that process of waking up is not always good, and it's not always easy. I'll correct myself. It's not always easy. It may be good, but it's not always easy for us. And we don't always want to do it. But one of the things about sleep is that we're not conscious of what's happening around us. We just don't care, and we go into this deep slumber, and we're not cognizant. Now, the Prophet ﷺ has said that when we're alive, we're asleep. When we die, we wake up. This whole life that we spend in a state, not a literal state of sleep, but a metaphorical state of sleep. But the interesting thing is, just like sleep, we go through cycles. Now, this sleep has been called or used in traditions. There's a particular word, and that word is ghafla, negligence. Because when we're sleeping, we don't really care what's happening in the outside world. It's so irrelevant to us. Unless somebody wakes us up, then it bothers us. But you know when it doesn't bother us? When somebody wakes us up over something so important, at first we get a little bit upset, but then they tell us, no, the house was burning down. No, I needed to save your life. No, this is happening. No, someone's in the hospital. Then we say, oh, thank you so much for waking me up. I'm glad you did this. I'm glad you woke me up. Otherwise, I'd be really upset at you, but I'm okay now because you woke me up and I needed to know this to save my life or to save someone's life. That's the only time we don't get upset, when somebody wakes us up. Now, we go through life in this state of ghafla, okay? The state of negligence. And just like sleep, we go through these rhythms. And sometimes the strangest thing happens. We go through these rhythms of going to REM and then coming out of REM and going into a light state again. And then going back into REM and then going into almost coming out of sleep. We almost come out of this sleep. We just don't realize it. And then we go back in, and then we almost come back out. Now, This word ghafla in traditions is mentioned. I'll mention this tradition of Imam Ali alayhi salam. He describes ghafla in this type of sleep with an additional term. He says that come to your senses from this intoxication. وَاسْتَقِذْ مِنْ غَفْلَتِكَ. Come to your senses and awaken from your negligence. Awaken, come out of it. You've been sleeping. There's things you haven't recognized, things that are passing, things that are happening, things that are moving. Now, when we go to sleep, the world goes on. People on the other side of the world are doing what they're doing. People on this side of the world are doing certain things. But we're oblivious to all of that. We don't care about all of that. We don't care about the realities of the world. We just couldn't care. It becomes irrelevant to us. Imam Ali alayhi salam describes this type of sleep, the sleep or this ghafla that we go through, as an intoxication. It's like we become drunk. Now, what is that ghafla? Ghafla is so powerful that it's not just like a sleep, but it's like a drunken sleep. We can become so intoxicated with it that we don't care about anything else. For those of you who have seen somebody drunk, hopefully not, but if you've seen somebody drunk, sometimes they're so drunk they're oblivious to anything that's happening. They don't care about the road, they don't care if they drive, they don't care if they hurt somebody. They've done studies in several cities. They found out that the murder rate in many cities is linked to the person having alcohol. A person can go so far when they drink that they can murder somebody and not realize what they're doing, not realize the consequences of what's happening around them. Now, ghafla is the same way. A person not just a person, we can become so oblivious of everything around us that we become drunk with it. If we think, and I'd like everyone to do this exercise, think of 10 years ago of something you did that you would never do right now. You just completely would never do it because it is so ridiculous and so bad that you say to yourself, why would I do that? We were in a state of ghafla. We were in a state of total absence of mind where we thought this particular thing was okay. And it was fine for me to do, and my state of life was fine, and how I was going about things was okay. We were essentially drunk. We couldn't see the most obvious things around us. Now, another tradition narrated by the Imams regarding ghafla. Let's have a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, again, the intoxication of ghafla. Now, ghafla comes with a second thing. It comes with something called ghurur, or delusion. He says the intoxication of ghafla and ghurur and delusion are harder to resume consciousness from than the intoxication of wine. Being negligent, not understanding something, being immersed in something is so intoxicating that we cannot even come out of that consciousness. It's harder to come out of that consciousness than it is to take somebody out of a drunkenness of wine. Now, ghafla is heedlessness, meaning we don't even recognize the obvious. We don't even see the obvious. Ghurur is another thing where we see something and we're deluded by it. We see something that's not worth anything, but it looks beautiful. It just looks so good to do. Now, if we look at our whole society, it's very easy to get caught up and be deluded by simple things. Everything in our society is made this way. If you take the amount of money that you should have, this delusion of that you have to have a certain amount of money, and if you don't have that certain amount of money, you have to look like you have a certain amount of money. If you have to look like you have a certain amount of money, you have to drive a certain type of car. You have to dress a certain type of way. You have to act a certain type of way. So this delusion of seeing the world in a certain fashion. For women, this is much harder than for even men. Consistently, this issue of ghurur, women are attacked with over and over and over again. So an example of this is it will always seem, or it seems to always seem, that a woman who doesn't wear hijab has everything. That hijab is difficult. That hijab is not good. And the opposite is quite true, that none of that is true. That if a person doesn't wear hijab, they'll attain certain things. None of that is true. So this issue of ghurur comes up especially for women in our society. In men, it comes up in a different way. It's so interesting now in our country what's happening, that we see a shift in our communities too. We see a shift where we see that people are moving, this concept of people being deluded by certain things is happening in our society. People are being deluded by money, people are being deluded by fame, people are being deluded by actors, actresses, politicians, all of these different things. But we also see that it's very interesting that people are also awakening. It's not that people are just in a total state of ghafla. We see the opposite happening also. We see that people are slowly moving towards awakening in some ways. Even though certain people are moving towards this level of, this stage of being deluded in our society. You know, it's funny how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us certain things. And I'm going to go off on a little bit of tangent here. So, over the last, 5 years, there's been a heavy emphasis on Muslim women in our society, and Muslim women are specifically kind of attacked culturally. Okay, you guys have all heard about the ban in Europe, and then the ban over here. They've tried to ban people here. The burkini ban, and this ban, and that ban, and all these articles about how Muslim women should dress, and how Muslims should act, Sharia law, and this and that, and people who don't even understand what that means are talking about Sharia law. I asked a person, they said, no, Muslims are trying to put Sharia law here. I go, I'm just curious, what's Sharia law? What's Sharia law? He's like, oh, well, you know that law. I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm just curious, but what exactly is in Sharia law? They're like, you have to wear a burqa. I'm like, is that Sharia law? He's like, yeah, that's Sharia law. So, no, people say these things, right? You guys have heard these. People say these things. So there's this heavy emphasis on Muslim women. Act like this, talk like this, dress like this, do this, do this, do this. And we see the pressure in our communities, and we see it's difficult. And we see Muslim women even shift how they dress a little bit because this pressure is so much. And I realized this, how we sometimes become so disconnected from how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can turn everything around in one day. So in one day, they give this executive order about this travel ban or whatever. 2 days later, LAX, they flash this screen. You see Muslims in the airport praying in Salatul Jama'ah. I'm like, wow, Muslims are praying in the airport. Now, praying in the airport's not a big deal. I mean, I pray in the airport, but a lot of Muslims get really worried about praying in the airport. They're like, no, you can't pray in the airport. It's going to create problems. They're going to stop you. So I'm looking at the picture on the internet, and then I start reading the article. Then I realize that the people in the line, there were about 10 people in the line, only 3 of them were Muslim. Only 3 of them were Muslim. The other 7 of them were non-Muslim. So that's strange. I keep reading the article. Then it shows this crowd. It shows this crowd of Muslims in hijab with these posters and demonstrating there. So I keep reading the article. Then I realize in this crowd, there were again a small group of Muslim women who had hijab. The other women in the group were non-Muslims. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just flipped this situation, just very quickly like that. And He said, socially, He said, awaken. Wake up. Be proud of who you are. I'm not only going to make it so that I'll show you to be proud of who you are, I'm going to show you that a non-Muslim atheist is proud of who you are. I will take a non-Muslim and make them wear hijab. I will show you that a non-Muslim will pray and do salat. And this was an awakening. Okay, this was an awakening for us, that on a social level, that we can fall into a state of ghafla, not just on a personal level, that things can become normal to us. We can slide by, and we can go into a state of, it's okay, it's just right now, it's time to be calm, and it's time to just not do anything, and it's time to just relax. And no. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, what are you doing? I'm allowing you to see that even a non-Muslim will imitate you. A non-Muslim. You don't have to imitate them. Wake up. And this was a very profound thing for me to see this. Now, this is not just about that. This is not just about women wearing a hijab, but this is about falling into a state of ghafla where we forget what it is to be Muslim and how positive that is and how great that is. Now, Imam Ali alayhi salam says you can become so deluded that you can become drunk and none of this other stuff can matter to you anymore. You can just completely ignore it. And when we completely ignore it, one of the things that happens with ghafla is we move on with our lives, and days pass, weeks pass, months pass, years pass, and then something has to hit us, literally hit us over the head to make us wake up and say, you know what? What was I doing? That was silly. I didn't need to be in that state. I would have been way farther along in life if I had just realized this back then. If you think about 10 years ago, if you think about something you would have realized 10 years ago, where you would be today if you realized that. That is yaghza. When we go to the grave, this tradition of the Prophet ﷺ is that when we go to the grave, we will awaken. Now, what happens in the grave? Surah Yasin, it mentions that a man dies and he says, oh, if only my people knew what's happening here. If only they understood. But I wish I could go back. And I wish I could change things. And I wish I could actually do this. But we can't. And one of the things yaghza teaches us is that we cannot go back in time and fix things. We cannot change things. But what we can do is, if we are awakened, we can become more determined not to go back to that state. Now, sleep is a funny thing, because if you're anything like me, you want to hit the alarm clock multiple times. Because the way the human soul is that we hit that alarm clock and we're like, I'm awake. I realize it's Fajr. But I'd kind of like to go back. Just for 10 minutes. I'd like to just continue this for 10 minutes because it was going pretty good till that alarm clock woke me up. But when you wake up, if we truly wake up, if we have an awakening that shakes us, that stirs us, we can never go back. Ever go back. There was a person that I knew who came to Islam. Now, when we talk about people who come to Islam, people don't convert to Islam. Okay, they don't convert. Nobody converts. We believe people are born in their fitrat, on this path. Their parents change them to believe in something else other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the most important thing is that we don't convert. People realize that they are Muslim. They awaken to this reality. Okay? It's not that we're changing somebody's belief, that we're altering it. It's that they realize what their true purpose is. They realize what their true destiny is. They realize why they are here. And when a person realizes that, then their life changes. They go through this awakening. And they can never go back. Now, so I had a friend who was very close to me, and he didn't believe in any particular religion. He didn't have a good family life, and eventually he got into crime. And during this process, when he got into crime, he suddenly learned about Islam in the prison system. Now, when the story is very interesting, because when I met him, he was an extremely humble guy. His name was Hassan, and he was a very, very humble guy. But he happened to be like an 8th degree or 9th degree in martial arts. And one day he decided to tell me his story, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, so just tell me, how did you become Muslim? I'm just curious. You know, the question that most people who realize Islam, it annoys them because every single person has to ask them that question. So I didn't want to ask him in the beginning. So I'm like, I'll just wait a little while. So after about 2 years, I knew him and said, hey, so how'd you become Muslim? So then he tells me the story. He said he came from Mississippi, and he said he studied martial arts all his life since he was about 3 years old. And he came out here, and his father left him, and his mother basically then left him when he was 15. And he was on the street, and he had no way of making money. So he said, I didn't know how to make money, so I went out and I started committing crimes. I went onto the street, and I would go and I would attack people and I would rob them. And now this is the sweetest guy. He would smile all the time and laugh and joke. He's the sweetest guy. He's like a teddy bear. I'm telling you, he's like, Dawood's met him. He's just a nice guy. So he said he'd walk up to people and he'd just basically tell them, give me your money, and then they wouldn't give their money, and then he'd just beat them up or hurt them really bad, and then he said that then they would give him the money. And then so I said, okay, so, well, what happened? He said, well, most of my crimes I used to commit, I used to go and I used to go to the beach, and there used to be couples there, and I used to walk up to them and I said, give me your money. And he used to say, first the guy used to get defensive, and that took about 10 seconds. And then all of a sudden they would give me their money. So he said, he told me a story of how he joined a gang, and his gang used to do this. And then I asked him, so, when you were non-Muslim and you did this, did you ever use a gun or anything? And he's like, no, I didn't need to. I never needed to. Now, when I say he was a very good fighter, he was a very good fighter. I've seen him in practice in front of 6 or 7 people, and I've seen him take down 6 or 7 people. So then he says, one day I went to the mall and we robbed a bunch of people, and they were all standing there, and they all asked, I told them to give me their money, and they gave the money, and me and my friends took off. Well, he said they called the police, and I got caught. So he said I went to jail at that point, and I was very angry. I didn't have my parents with me. I was very angry, but I didn't know why. And what I would do is I would just start attacking the guards in prison. And so the guards would say something to me, and I would just hit them. And I said, well, how did that work out? He said, they would take that silly stick out they have, and I'd take that away from them, and then 6 guards would come, and they'd subdue me, and then the whole prison would lock down, and I'd keep doing this. And he was in juvenile hall. He was 16 years old. And this kept happening over and over again. So finally his case appeared in court, and the judge looked over his case, and from the time he got arrested to the time he went to court, he had 38 infractions, which means he hit somebody or committed violence 38 times in the prison, and he was in solitary confinement. So I said to him, so what happened? He said, the judge looked over my case, and she looked through that entire case, and she said, she was right about to send me away for a very long time. And then the last page she looked at was the psychologist's report. And she looked at the psychologist's report and she said, you've gone through a lot. Your father and mother left you. I'm going to give you one more chance. And this one last chance, I'm going to send you back to juvenile hall. And if you mess up one more time, that's it, you're done. So I said, well, what happened? He said, I shouted some profanities at the judge, and then they took me back to juvenile hall. And then he said the next day, surprisingly, my uncle came to visit me. Now, his uncle happened to be Muslim. And his uncle came to him and he said, I know you're in prison. I just want to give you this Quran. And he gave him a Quran. And then he left. And so he starts reading this Quran, and then all of a sudden he slowly starts changing, just little by little by little. And he gets released from prison, and now he's Muslim. He's claiming to be Muslim. He just reads the Quran. He doesn't know really what Islam is. He just says, I'm Muslim. So he goes back to his old place, his old hangout, and then all of a sudden his old gang members call him, so he goes back there. And he starts hanging out with them. And I said to him, okay, so what happened? He said, well, I was standing there one day, he said, and I went back to my old lifestyle, and then a car started driving by. And he said that car drove by, he said, and the person in the car, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was from another gang. He said, and the person in that car stared at me and looked me straight in the face. And he kind of hesitated for just a second. He said in his hesitation, as the car was driving by, the person looked at me like he wanted to stop and do something, and then he didn't, and he drove a little past me, few feet past me. He said, and then I heard shooting. And then I realized this person in the car was shooting people. He said, and I hit the floor and I ran. And he said, I realized that in my life, that this was the last chance God was giving me. That person looking at me, something made that person hesitate. And he could have taken out that gun and he could have started firing at me, but he didn't. And that was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way of telling me, and I knew it in my heart, that was his way of telling me, this is your last chance. So he said, then I realized I can't go back to that life, so I looked for a masjid, and I arrived at a masjid, and they were having a Jummah khutbah there, and the imam just happened, I came on the day of Ashura. And so he goes to this masjid, and there's all these guys there, and they're ex-gang members, and they've got all these tattoos on their face and everything, and they're in the Jummah khutbah, and the imam's up there, and the imam is saying, they did this to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and they did this to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he's recounting the tragedy of Karbala, and Hassan's sitting there, and he's saying, what? They did this to a brother. Let's go get them, man. Let's go get them. And he's looking at all the brothers, and he's saying, brothers, and they're crying. These huge, big guys are like crying, and he's like, man, what are you guys crying for? We need to go out there and do something. And it's just like, no, brother, just calm, just don't worry about it right now. Just stay there and listen. And then he answered my question. He said, that's when I changed. I read the Quran. I saw the guy. I saw Allah give me the chance, but I didn't really change. But that's when I changed. And something happened to me in my heart. When I heard his story, I don't know what happened, but something inside my heart switched. And when I saw those people who could have done anything, those ex-gang members, and they were weeping for Imam Hussein, that's when my heart awoken. And since he told me that story, I've always thought about that story of how in a moment someone can awake. Just in a moment, we can be in a state of ghafla and we can awaken. I'll end with this because I know I'm running out of time. Al-hujjah retreat is about you. It is about awakening. You may have been told 1,000,000 times in a lecture about taqwa and about good deeds and about your a'mal and about all of these things. I don't want you to solely focus on that in this retreat. We all need to focus on how do we awaken? How do we get to muhasabah? We awaken. How do we become a stronger community? We awaken. How do we change? We awaken. We come out of our sleep. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this retreat to cause that awakening. Do tawassul to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Imam Hussein changes hearts. He changes 22 million hearts. On one day, he calls and they come, and they come, and they come. Even if you awaken for a second, search for that. That 1 second that you can awaken at this retreat. Don't miss that opportunity. I'm looking for it at this retreat. in one of my conversations with one of you, in one of my talks, maybe when I'm alone, maybe when I'm playing with my son, maybe when I'm staring at a tree, I'm going to pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala awakens me just a little bit more. Make me close to you. Remove this hijab of ghafla. Draw me close so that I can sacrifice for you. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take us out of this state of ghafla. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His power, His will, and His grace to cause us to awaken before our death. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a life of consciousness so that we continuously awaken to the truth of His reality. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow and to show this awakening before Sahib Zaman, and that Allah includes us in this awakening when Sahib Zaman returns. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to include us in the party and the company of Imam Zaman. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin.